We are recording. Welcome, Mike Moyer. This is Penn University, and we've decided to do a review of some of the ideas in your book, Slicing Pie. I myself have read it a couple times now, and I've actually recently just started. We were right at the beginning of putting it into practice, so I wouldn't say I have a feel for it exactly yet, but I have plenty of questions. There is inside the chat some documents that I think we should all have access to. It's just a way of looking at kind of a shared notes, shared questions and stuff. So if you have any ideas, toss it in there. Feel free to edit it. If you see anything that catches your eye, feel free to ask about it. How should we get started? Maybe just do a real quick round of intros and end on Mike. Would that be all right?
Sure.
Okay, since I'm talking, I'm John Berryman. I work for, I'm a technologist search guy working for GitHub, but very interested in startups and maybe even using, maybe even making Penn University itself kind of a startup. So that's my interest in this discussion. I'll pass it to Colin.
Hi, I'm Colin. I'm working at a startup right now as a backend engineer to help building an app to help track habits. And I'm just really interested in what makes startups succeed. And so I like models like this.
Good. Bina?
Hi, I'm Bettina Kosisnik. I'm a data scientist, and I'm potentially shortly gonna be joining a startup. And I was always, my background is in economics, and I was always fascinated by startups, the different models and so on, and especially when it comes to financing. So your book provided very interesting insights.
Good. And finally, Michael.
Hey, Mike, I did a PhD in computer science at UVA and did a startup right out of that. And I guess I'm on startup number 4 now. And despite having read the Slicing Pie handbook a couple times in between all of those, still have never gotten equity right. So I feel like I should be here as punishment, as well as to ask questions and learn again.
Good. Yeah, good.
In full disclosure, Michael is the person that turned me on to this book. So
good, thanks.
You can thank him ultimately for this. Mike.
Have you guys all read Slicing Pie already? The Slicing Pie handbook? Yeah. Where do you want to start? Sometimes I do a PowerPoint about how it works. If you all know how it works already, I'm happy to answer questions and talk about the experiences you've had with it and any questions you might have.
If the PowerPoint is like a 10-minute type thing, then I think it'd be kind of good for a review. It's been a little bit since I put it in my mind.
Sure, it's it can be a 10-minute thing, or it can take a little longer. I'll go through it kind of quickly because you guys have seen it before. So let me.
All these things you can go sort of arbitrarily deep, right? If you're
yeah.
Spend enough time on them.
So I'll start with the Blackjack example. Hang on 1 second.
By the way, Mike, your time, our time is your time. How much time do you have for today?
I can about 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay, great.
Blocked off. Let me see here. So one of the things that people often, my goal is to get people's head around this thing, to make it obvious that it works all the time. Host disabled screens. Can you activate screen sharing for me?
Yes. This is the dance we always have to do. Allow all participants. You should have access now.
All right. Share my screen here. So can you see a Blackjack screen?
Can indeed.
The Blackjack example was actually introduced to me by one of my readers, and I've used it quite extensively in the years. But thinking about your startup as a game of blackjack is a simple way to see that this works. So do you know how to play blackjack, John?
Yes.
So let's pretend that you and I are going to go play blackjack together as a team, not as opponents, but together as a team. And we agree to split the winnings 50-50 because we're friends. We don't know if we're going to win. We don't know how much we're going to win. We don't know how long it's going to take to win. We can't tell the future. The future is unknowable. All we can tell is that we're going to play. So we go to the table, and I put a chip down, and you put a chip down. So the dealer deals an ace and another ace. So in blackjack, we're going to split the aces and double down. So we split the aces and double down, but I'm out of chips and you're not, so you put 2 more chips down. So now you've bet 3 chips and I bet 1 chip. We still don't know if we're going to win or how much we're going to win or how long it's going to take to win. We're optimistic, we're excited, we're confident we're going to win. We don't know for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But if we win, does 50-50 sound fair?
No longer.
No longer. It should be 75-25, right?
Hmm.
So it's a logical, obvious, unambiguous answer. There's no other way of looking at it. You should get 75 and I should get 25 because that reflects the relative value of our bets. And that's the same thing for slicing pie, but we're just betting on ideas instead of betting on cards. And you bet time and relationships and facilities and supplies and equipment. And every time you contribute to a startup and you're not getting paid, you're betting the fair market value of that contribution. So everyone's worth what they're worth. They're not magically worth more than what they're worth because they're working for a startup. And they're not magically worth less than they're worth. You're always worth what you could get on the fair market. Now that takes a little bit of negotiation, but it's much more logical to negotiate a fair market salary or a fair market price for something than it is to think about future events that haven't happened yet. So what slicing pie always does is it treats the person's share of the equity should always be based on that person's share of the bets. So what slicing pie does is it keeps track of the bets and it makes sure we know who's betting what and divides up equity based on that. Mm-hmm. So that's the core concept. Whenever you think about slicing pie or describe it to someone, you always think about what bets are on the table today. On day one, there's no bets. So we both have equal share because we both bet equal amounts of nothing. A year from now, if I bet $100,000 in salary and you bet $25,000 in salary, it's not ambiguous what the bets are. So the value of our equity should not be ambiguous either. Business is quantifiable. We can know the price of things going into business. So it's not ambiguous what should come out of it. You know, some things when it comes to fairness are ambiguous. Like for instance, what's the right prison sentence for a murderer? That's very ambiguous. It's not quantifiable necessarily, but business is quantifiable. So we can determine exactly what fair means. So I always break slicing pie into 2 chunks, an allocation framework and a recovery framework. So the allocation framework treats poker chips like a slice as a poker chip. So the slice is a marker for a bet. It just represents that a bet took place. It has no value, but it just plays like a poker chip. So as you make contributions and you're not paid, you simply convert those unpaid contributions to slices. And at any given time, your share is equal to your slices divided by the total slices. Just like in blackjack, it was your chips divided by all the chips. And it will self-adjust over time to stay fair as things change. So there's 2 main components of a bet. There's non-cash contributions like time and relationships and ideas and things that don't require cash out of pocket. And there are cash contributions which do require cash out of your pocket. So unreimbursed expenses, cash investments that are consumed and things like that. And some things are kind of in between. So like take equipment, for instance. If I own the equipment like a truck, if it's pre-owned, then it's probably a non-cash contribution because it didn't require cash out of my pocket. If I buy it for the company, that's considered cash out of pocket. So you always take the fair market value and you convert to slices by adding a multiplier. So it's 2 slices per dollar in non-cash. And that reflects the fact that it's a high risk bet and you'll probably lose it. So I double the slices per dollar to compensate for that. And for cash, it's different because if I paid you $100 an hour to work for me and you wanted to buy something that cost $100, it would take you more than an hour to earn enough money. Because when I paid you, I pay employment taxes and social security taxes. When you receive the money, you pay income taxes. And when you buy the thing, you pay sales tax and VAT tax. So you may have to work 2 hours to earn enough money. For that reason, we do a multiplier of 4 to smooth out cash and non-cash. Without the multipliers, people have no incentive to put cash in the company. And I've experienced this firsthand where I started a company without the multipliers, and everyone just expected me to cover all the expenses because they didn't want to spend any of their money, because there's no incentive for them to do so if it just equals the same thing as non-cash. So it's 2 slices per dollar in non-cash and 4 slices per dollar in cash. So to convert to slices, you take the fair market salary, for instance, of somebody, which is negotiable. You subtract cash compensation, because if I paid you, it's not a bet, it's not risky. And I multiply by 2 to get my grunt hourly resource rate, or GRR, which is the sound I make when I'm hard at work at my company. So $50 an hour is $100,000 a year. If I'm not getting paid, then I'm betting 100 slices per hour. I might get paid part of it though. I might get paid $10 an hour, which gets I'm only betting 80 slices per hour. And the more I get paid, the less I'm betting. Cash is considered converted to slices when it's spent. So when I consume money through expenses or investment, the money is consumed, it converts to cash. Equipment, like I said before, if you purchase it new for the company, it's ×4 for cash because it's cash. If it's less than a year old, I use the purchase price ×2. If it's more than a year old, I use the book value. Everything has a fair market value. And when you think about things in terms of fair market value, we can properly think of what the cost structures for our company are. If you don't think of things in terms of fair market value, then we really have no idea what our cost structures are for our startup, because we don't have reference points. It's always good to think about, if I was spending the money on this contribution, what would I spend? How much would I spend on it? You're always making good financial decisions that way. So if you think about relationships, people bring big Rolodex. The way relationships turn into value is they turn into sales or partnerships or investment. So I would pay a commission on that sale. If I paid it in cash, I just pay it in cash. If I don't pay it, it's treated as non-cash, and it's ×2. Ideas, if my idea has value, I could license it to somebody and get a royalty on it. In slicing pie, you either pay the royalty or you treat it as a non-cash contribution. Everything has a fair market value. Supplies and equipment are unreimbursed expenses. So here's a team of people milling around. This woman gets an idea. She hires a team. She puts in time and ideas and equipment. She hires a junior developer who does a website and an app, and rich uncle bankrolls the thing. So based on the fair market value of all those contributions, you simply convert to slices, add them all up, and divide each person's share. There's 1, 2, and 3. And now the split looks like this. This is properly allocated based on the relative value of each person's contribution that was not paid. Now, if you add somebody, here's Barry, he's a sales guy, big Rolodex. He brings in relationships and some time. You just convert his stuff to slices and you add it to the total and divide each person's share again. Now, pretending no one else does any more work this period, but it just keeps adjusting over time. So this is the new pie. Here's Barry, the salesperson, has 13%, which makes sense because relative to everybody else, that's his bet. Now, if the uncle is unwilling to budge on his equity split, he wanted a fixed split, then the founder and the junior developer would have had to duke it out to see who gave up their equity. It would have been a big fight and people would have been upset. Now, sometimes you want to get equity back from someone if someone leaves the company. So there's 4 reasons why someone can leave a company. They can be fired for good reason, which implies they weren't doing their job and they got warning, fired. Got to give someone a chance to correct their behavior. Or they did something that was grossly negligent, like embezzlement or sexual harassment, for instance, which is clearly a fireable, terminable offense. Or they can be fired for no good reason. If I don't give somebody a reason, then they're fired for no good reason, which is fine. I can fire someone whenever I want. They can resign for good reason. Resigning for good reason implies that the company made promises that it couldn't keep. So I might have said, oh, we'll pay you a salary in 6 months, and 6 months comes around, there's no salary. That's resigning for good reason. Or we're based in New Mexico, we're moving to Seattle, pack your bags. You can resign for good reason if something changes that dramatically. And the last thing, you can resign for no good reason, which means you just up and quit one day because you wanted to. You wanted to take a different job or whatever else reason. So if you're fired for good reason or you resign for no good reason, you're essentially walking away from your bet. So if you were a solo entrepreneur and you did this, you lose everything. So that's similar in slicing pie. If you walk away from your bet, you lose your slices for non-cash contributions and you lose the multiplier for cash contributions, which means it turns into a loan. So it's painful to leave under these circumstances, as it should be. If you want to participate in the outcome of the bet, don't walk away and don't get fired. On the flip side, if you resign for good reason or you are fired for no good reason, you keep your slices in the pie and they'll convert to equity along with everybody else when the pie converts. So your bet stays on the table. So even though you might be upset that you're leaving, you're still treated fairly in the context of the pie because people are giving you the equity later on when it converts. So here's an example of this. Here's our team. The junior developer didn't do any work. He's slacking off for a week. We give her a warning. A week goes by, she still hasn't upped her game. Another warning. Another week goes by, she's fired. All she had in was time. So we take her slices away from the pie, they go away. And you recalculate them and share. There's number 2, number 3, number 4. And the new pie looks like this. It's self-adjusted to reflect the remaining fair market value of each person's share. Now, people might say, oh, this person, they have more now, but then they need to go out and hire a new developer now, which is going to be inconvenient. It's not necessarily better off. But at this point in time, the pie is properly adjusted. Now, you eventually want to bake the pie. Baking the pie means you issue regular equity, common shares, or membership interests, and it turns a crisp golden brown and tastes delicious. You do this at break even or Series A. When you reach break even, you're generating enough revenue to pay all your expenses and your salaries. You got to make sure your salaries are in there too. And when that happens, bets are no longer taking place, so the pie naturally stops accumulating slices. So if I'm worth $50 an hour and I get paid nothing, I'm betting 100 slices per hour. Revenue comes in, and that revenue is paying expenses and goes towards my time. Now, if I get paid $10 an hour, my risk goes down. The more I get paid, the more my bets go down over time, up until the point where I'm paid in full and I'm betting 0 slices per hour on a go-forward basis, which means the pie is frozen. And after that, I get profits. The profits can be retained as retained earnings, or they can be distributed to shareholders as dividends, in which case the bet is paying off and the proceeds of dividends are paid off to each individual member. This is just like in Blackjack, paying off at 75-25. The other alternative is to raise a Series A funding round. So in this case, I'm going to negotiate $900,000 pre-money valuation as an example. I'm going to raise $1 million. That means I sold 53% of the company. I use that money to pay salaries and expenses, so no one else has to make any more bets. And now when the profits come in, I have to split them with the Series A investor. So what Slicing Pie gives you is a perfectly fair model that rewards the actual contributions people make. It provides ongoing motivation to continue to contribute. It accommodates team changes. It's flexible in the face of rapid change, and it always works. Now, if you come across someone who wouldn't want to use Slicing Pie, or it says no to it, there's 3 reasons why they wouldn't want to do that. The first reason is they don't get it. And there's lots of resources to help them get it. And I spend a lot of my time teaching people how to do it on calls like this, for instance. There's books that have been written about it. Slicing Pie Handbook is the most recent one that you should buy. There's a new book coming out called Will Work for Pie that goes into more detail on certain subjects. The book has been translated into about 10 different languages. It's used all over the world. There's software online that helps you manage the split with your team. There's books and spreadsheets and legal agreements and all kinds of stuff on slicingpie.com. A lot of it's free. I want to make sure everyone in the world works with Slicing Pie because it always works. The second reason someone would say no to you, though, is they're not willing to learn it. They don't want to take the time to learn it. They want to do it the old way. I always recommend you steer clear of these people. If they're not willing to learn, you just go find somebody else. And the third reason is they do understand it, but they want to take advantage of you. And there are people out there who are willing to take advantage of you because they can smell your desperation. Just be careful of those people and realize that they can be replaced later on and make sure that's possible so you stay safe. So that's the quick version of how the model works. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that helpful? Nick, hi, Dick, you're on the call.
Hey, sorry, joined a little late.
Yeah, that was a great review. Fortunately, I feel like all that stuff is still mostly in my head. So maybe it's a good time to open it up for the conversation, some questions. I've got plenty of stuff to ask, but I don't think I want to start. I'll give the floor to you guys.
Michael, you said you went through a couple of rounds of companies and you knew Slicing Pie, but you didn't use it. What was the conversation like with your co-founders to not use it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there was really only one that we were setting up from scratch. So the other ones had a bunch of baggage tagged along with them. And I think, to be honest, didn't expect that to turn into a real company. It was one of those moments. It was one of those things where you're like, oh, fun toy idea. Like, okay, whatever, I'll take, my 5% or something. Like, doesn't really matter to me. And then we never had a serious conversation about it until we had to have the serious conversation, which of course, as it always does, turns into a big fight. So
you had to fight.
Yep.
Most people find slicing pie when they're in the middle of a fight. So they get back into a corner, and that's when they start looking for solutions. They're like, what the hell, how do I unwind this?
Yeah.
And so there's a chapter in the slicing pie handbook called retrofits. There's a spreadsheet that actually walks you through the process. So it's very common to retrofit. And even if you agree to something, it doesn't make it fair. So in the blackjack game, we had a 50-50 deal, right? I could sue you and probably win, but that didn't make it fair. Just because we agreed to it, and just because our lawyer reviewed it, just because we signed on it, and just because we were sound mind, it doesn't make it fair. So slicing pie always points you to the fair answer. So what the contracts do is just give someone a right to be a dick. So it just gives them a legal right to be a dick. So if that's who you are, then you can enforce that. And I've worked with people like that before, and it's unfortunate, but I've worked with people who get it, but they're just dicks. And so they get rich off everyone else's hard work.
So maybe I could ask a question so even if you've done this to get started, now you're hiring your like second or third employee, and the math for them is maybe a little bit different, right? So like if I'm thinking purely selfishly as an employee, I'm thinking, okay, I'm worth $50. I'm only going to get paid $10. I'm very concerned that the equity I'm getting is worth that $40 an hour. And I guess like in my mind, there's two easy modes. One is where the startup's totally untested, it's early stage, and realistically, you should probably apply like 0 to that mentally. And then there's like huge companies where you sort of have some intuition of what the stock is worth. I find it more complicated when it's like, okay, we've been around 4 or 5 years. Like this company clearly isn't worth 0, even if it goes belly up. Like, maybe you've built a factory somewhere or something, and like there's clearly some minimum value of the company. And then people start applying numbers to it, and it's like, I don't really know what to tell those people. It's like, you can tell them, well, hey, this is how we're doing it. It's fair. But then they're like, okay, but you're not incentivizing me enough. Like, you might think it's fair, but I want more money.
Right, that's a good question. So slicing pie only works when there's a 0 valuation. If the company can be valued, then you don't need slicing pie. You use the value of the shares. So it works until break even or Series A. Before that point, it's not really valuable. A company that hasn't reached break even yet doesn't really have a lot of value because it just generates liabilities. So you basically own a liability. So you can't say it's worth something because it's just generating liabilities. So it's like, what's the point of owning that? So you got to, when the company reaches break even, you say, oh, you got customers, you got intellectual property, you got revenues, you got something of value. It can be valued. And once I know the value of the shares, then that's what I'm trading on. If I set a value early before I reach break even, then I'm setting myself for all kinds of problems. But one problem is the IRS is going to say, oh, you're pretending your shares are worth $10 a share. That's what you're going to get. Or if I set $1 million valuation, then I use up $1 million in shares, I've basically run out of money. So you always use it before break even. So it terminates after break even or Series A.
And when you say break even, like most of my businesses have been like software as a service businesses, often you kind of see this moment where you're like, you're going to hit break even, or maybe it's even inevitable because of contracts you have signed for the next 5 years or something. Would you say, well, then you are break even? Or would you say, no, you really like, an asteroid could still hit your headquarters and like take the whole thing down, kind of?
If you rely, I always think people as being reliably break even. So I know that reliably. And one thing to always keep in mind is you're not break even unless you're paying salaries. So you may say, I'm covering all my expenses, my contractors, my software fees and rent, but I'm not paying myself. That's not break even. I have people say, oh, we made $50,000 in profits last year. I say, how much did you pay yourself? Nothing. What are you worth? $100,000. You lost 50 grand. So make sure your salaries are baked in there. Salaries and equity are different things. If you were to go work for Apple Computer and they said, hey, good news, we found out that you own Apple Computer shares, so we don't have to pay your salary. You'd say, hell no, that doesn't work. You get paid your salary plus your dividends. So you can't tie the two together.
So once you reach this break-even point or a Series A, do you advocate going to something more standard? What is that? Or do you advocate going to something that is kind of like the slicing the pie, but not quite? Or what's the next step?
So once you reach break even, your shares are bought and paid for, and you own those shares, common shares. And then you're just paying everybody. So everyone's getting paid in full for their job. So there's no reason to use there's no risk being taken. So beyond that, if you want to do stock options or stock, I always say give people the opportunity to buy shares. So my new book includes a bonus program where you can earn it shows you how to allocate bonuses. You can say, you earn $10,000 in bonus. Here's a check for $10,000, or you can buy shares. What you never want to do is give shares to somebody. If someone's not willing to buy shares, they don't believe in your company. If you don't believe in Apple Computer, you're not going to buy Apple Computer shares. If somebody gives you the shares, you'll take them, thanks, but it's not going to change anything about your behavior. If you buy them, it's evidence that you believe in the business. So after break even, you're just getting paid. So one way to think about this is, let's say you and I start a company together. Or let's say our dad gives us a company. He dies and gives us the business. It's profitable. And we each get 50% of the dividends when they're paid out, 50-50. And we have a president that works for the company. Everyone gets paid a full salary, and they're perfectly happy doing that because they're all getting paid a full salary. And then you decide you want to work for the company, but I don't want to work for the company. You want to be the company's president. So you get paid the president's salary plus 50% of your dividends. That make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then if I want to work for the company, then I get paid the salary of the person of the job I'm doing. If we both want to quit, we can both quit and hire someone to do our jobs and go retire to the beach. So as long as you're getting paid in full, the work is there. So you don't need a slice and pie model afterwards. If I want the president to buy in, I'll say, we'll pay your salary plus the bonus and you can buy in. But it's really important to separate the two and give opportunity to buy in, because if the only reason they work for your startup is if they believe in you. If they don't believe in you, they won't work for your startup. Unless you pay. And I work for startups I don't believe in, but I ask for cash. I'll do the work for you, but I'll just get paid cash.
So the big unifying theme here, the reason that it doesn't make as much sense after the break even is risk goes away. Everything's got a value at that point, and that's really what you're doing with slicing pie.
Yeah, most people have jobs that they get paid for, and they don't get equity. I go work for McDonald's. I flip hamburgers. I do it 8 hours a day. I get paid $15 an hour. I'm perfectly happy. I don't say, where's my equity? Because I'm getting paid. If I'm getting paid $5 an hour, I say, well, wait a minute, that's not fair. I got to be made whole, and I can be made whole through equity. Now, if I grant equity shares for that $10 an hour, that's going to be treated as income. So I can't do that because it has a value. But if there is no value, you're giving me something that has no value. So I can't divide zero by anything. So I got to look at it from a relative standpoint, where everyone's risk is.
That makes sense.
What, I might have a little bit of trouble phrasing this question, but what do you do when you have like an angel investor or something? Say somebody gives you $50,000 for 5% of your company, just throwing random numbers out there. Do you kind of remove that from the pie, or how do you fit that into the pie? Because that stake has to stay constant, even if you haven't reached the break-even point. How do you fit that in?
So that's a great question, and that's a common mistake. Once I sell 5% for $50,000, I have implied a valuation of $1 million. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So when I give any equity to people, that they're going to be taxed at $1 per share if I issue 1 million shares. That's a real thing that can happen. Plus, I've limited the investor's exposure to $50,000, and I've left myself unlimited. That makes sense? So I can keep racking up expenses on my own, and I never benefit from it because that person's always bumping me out. So think about 3 kinds of investors: participants, contributors who are making bets and not getting paid. Then there are people who invest their own money in amounts that are too small to fund your operation. They're called angel investors. and they should get convertible notes. So you push that valuation off to later. And the third type of investor is a professional investor who invests other people's money in amounts that are large enough to fund your operation in full. They're called VCs. So wait for that VC round before you put a valuation on your company. If an angel investor says, no, I want a fixed chunk of shares, just say, maybe this isn't the investment for you. If it's a good investment, you'll find other investors. If it's not a good investment, you probably shouldn't take the money anyway. So one of the acid tests for deciding if you have a good investment is if you can attract other investors. You know, if you find one angel, if it's only your mom willing to invest, that may not be a very good investment. So just, you know, if it's a good deal, you'll find other investors.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
On a similar note, I was wondering, so say you have an angel investor, they've contributed a sum of money, right? And you fit them into the slicing pie model. And now they want to have a position in your company as an advisor. How do you factor someone basically just advising you on decisions into that model? Does that factor in because you can't really put a fair market value on advice?
So if there's two parts to that question. Thanks for asking. The first is if they're an angel investor. So if I'm an angel investor, I can give them a convertible note and they can look after their investment by advising me.
Mhm.
If you want to engage them formally as an advisor, you can put money value on advice. That's extremely doable. Everything's got a fair market value. So if you hire a lawyer, the lawyer's job is to give you advice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you pay the lawyer $350 an hour, and that's his job. His job is to give you awesome advice, or her job is to give you awesome advice that's worth way, way more than $350 an hour. So you go to your advisor and you say, all right, I need 10 hours a month of your time. I'm going to ask you about sales, marketing, and customer service. And I'm going to give you $1,000 a month retainer, either paid in cash or paid in slices. And as long as you're happy doing that, and we're getting along, every month I'll give you $1,000 paid and payable in slices. When I get the cash, I'll pay you in cash. If you don't like doing it, you can quit, or I can fire you if you're not doing your job. It's just a mini employee. So to have that discussion with the advisor, you know, what are you worth? If an advisor says I'm worth $1 million an hour, that's a stupid person. So, you know, it's unrealistic. And I've had people say I'm worth, you know, $1 million, this is $1 million advice, so I should get half your company. I've literally had someone say, this is $1 million advice I'm giving you. Well, I don't want to pay $1 million for it. I always think if you're gonna pay him. So when you
trade him, be like, all right, give me the check instead.
Yeah. So you know, but sit down with an advisor and ask them what they want. Now, if they know slicing pie, they'll probably realize pretty quickly that they're better off investing directly in the company rather than getting a convertible note. So I always think of convertible notes as for arm's length investors. If they're participating in the company actively, you put them in the pie actively. You know, you pay them their salary, and you pay or an advisor fee, and their money would convert to slices as it's consumed. But you're taking chunks of cash from arm's length people who aren't involved in the company. Just it's easier to do a convertible note.
Hey, could I ask the you know, the multipliers, like the 2x and 4x, are obviously like kind of arbitrary, right? I mean, you could change those and still run the same thing.
Actually, you can't. There's a reason you can't change those. There's one way you can change them. You can change them to 1 and 2 if you want. But the reason that the 2 and 4 exist is because it's not totally arbitrary. The chance of your company staying in business is about 50%. Some people say 90%, about 50%. So to account for that risk for non-cash, I double it to say there's a 50% chance you're going to lose. So expected value is 1. That's the 2 comes from. And years ago, I did an analysis on global tax rates, income tax rates, employment tax rates, sales tax rates, capital gains tax rates, all, and on a global basis, on average, it was about 50% again. It just had to be 50%. So I doubled it again to get that number. If you change it, you're overvaluing cash, you're undervaluing time. But you can do 2 and 1, but it's important that you can do 1 and 2 and 1. By doing 2 and 4, you obscure the underlying inputs. So people don't think about $1 a slice. I don't want people to think $1 per slice because that would sound too much like a security. So I want to obscure that number and just use it as a marker. Plus, and I've seen this happen before, if two companies that use slicing pie want to merge, all you got to do is add them together if they're using the same multipliers. So this is a small benefit because that didn't happen very often, but because it's universal, you can just add them together. So the multipliers, changing the multipliers generally does not work to your advantage unless you change it to 1 and 2, which is, there's no, but the obscurity is important because I don't want people to say there's a million slices, so we're worth $1 million.
Yeah, so I guess like personally, I would push back on that like 50% survival rate, or I guess it's really 50% to making it to break even. I guess is kind of the target. That there's kind of different varieties of startups, right? I mean, some are real like spitball. This probably isn't going to work, but we've roped in some investor to try the idea out. And then there's some like lifestyle businesses that you sort of have an intuition, like, yeah, I'm sure I can make this work.
Yeah, that includes small businesses, plumbers, and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, I mean, would you say if you've thought hard about it and you feel like you have a different number in mind than 50%, you should apply that to the multipliers, or is that kind of like
it doesn't improve the it doesn't make things more fair in my experience.
Yeah.
It just gives you another number to negotiate. And I want to take negotiation out of it because everyone's getting treated by the same rules, whether it's 0.9%, multiplied by 9. There's no real value. The real difference is what's the relative value of cash versus non-cash. That's where because you got to smooth it out. If I said you work for $50 an hour, and every hour you got to pay $50 to rent your office, and there's worth the same thing, you're be more willing to work for $50 an hour than cough up $50 an hour. So it's like you can either give me $50 an hour or work $50 an hour. So for instance, if you came to work for me and your choice was to take half your salary in cash out of my pocket, you have an incentive not to do that, because when I give you the cash, I earn 4 slices per dollar. If you don't take the cash, you earn 2 slices per dollar. So I earn at a much faster rate than you do by consuming cash. So your goal is to not consume cash, so we're aligned. When the money goes in the bank, I have an incentive not to consume cash. The goal of any investment is to spend as little as possible to get the highest maximum return. So it aligns everything. I haven't seen it improve the model by changing it.
Gotcha. It is kind of funny, right? There's kind of 2 different like groups of people. There's people who are like, I'm not really interested in working on this project unless I feel like I'm going to get a big payout at the end, which obviously they like the risk, right? That's part of the appeal. Then there's people who are usually saner or have some experience, and they're like, no, I'd much rather take my full salary and do something else with that. It's kind of a personal choice, which one of those you value more, I guess.
You should be relatively indifferent to it. If you worked for my startup and I paid you in full, you should be cool. If you think the company's great, then I don't pay you in full, then you get slices, that's cool too. It should be, the match should be relatively indifferent. Now, if you really want to invest in the company, you might say, gosh, I'd like to forego salary to get the company, to conserve capital. And as long as it's valuable to me, I don't know what to do. But I own companies. I own Slicing Pie, and I pay my guys the full fair market salary. I pay everybody, and they're all cool with it because they're all paid. They know what I do. There's no secret. This is an equity thing, but I don't have to share the equity because I pay them, and they don't have any problem with it.
I guess the goal there is just to be super duper transparent. Like, we know that the pie, we don't know what the value will really be ever, but it's just super transparent how he came to that decision. And so it's a lot easier to choose the way you're paid.
In a fixed split, in a traditional split, it feels good because you know what you're going to get. Oh, I know I'm getting 5%. I know I'm getting 10%. The problem is whatever you get, it's going to be wrong. With Slicing Pies, you don't know what you're going to get right. It's a little more ambiguous. But the good news is whatever you get, it's going to be the right number.
Mm-hmm. So how did you come to this philosophy? I think you alluded to it in your book that you got bit a couple times, right?
I've been burned several times. And when I was in graduate school, I started a company, and I went to all my professors and I said, hey, how do you do this? And they all had really wishy-washy answers. Figure this, figure $1 million and extra. There was no concrete solution to it. So I created a version of slicing pie where we always take an hourly rate and earn dollar per dollar, you know, our dollars relative to everybody else's dollar. There were no multipliers in it. And that's where I consumed a lot of my cash. But it got tested though, because I had an employee come in and work for 2 weeks and then just disappeared and didn't show up anymore. And then I got a bill for $10,000 in the mail or $8,000 in the mail from him. And I didn't agree to pay him anything. And he sued me in Illinois and went to arbitration for small claims. And I took his letter that explained the system to the arbitrator, and she looked at it and said, "Oh, this is pretty clear what's going on. You didn't owe you any money." And that was a good test to say, you know, this model has some validity, because we weren't screwing the guy. He walked away. And this whole idea of recovering equity is important, because what happens is when someone walks away and they own a chunk of equity, they want something for it. If you're a solo entrepreneur and you walk away, you get nothing. So why should I think if I'm a partner, I walk away from my partner, I should get something later on? I should lose everything. So what happens oftentimes is we got to negotiate a buyout. So, you know, try to pretend what it's worth, and they'll do a buyout. And the person that's walking away is the only one who makes any money, and everyone else loses. So it becomes a big problem. There was a movie once that I saw where it was a documentary about a startup company, and there's 3 founders, and one of the founders flaked out after the first couple of months, and they raised hundreds of millions of dollars, but they had to buy this guy out. They gave him $800,000 for his share. He's the only person in the whole business that made any money whatsoever, the guy who flaked out in the beginning. And it's extremely common.
I was gonna say that's a super common story, I feel like.
Yeah.
And people
got to hire lawyers, and it's just a mess. But the recovery rules in slicing pie, it's just basic logic. Where it gets really interesting is, let's say you're the founder of an organization. So Michael, you're the founder, and you've been working for 6 months, you know, and you have the majority of the slices. And I come in and start working for you, and I'm the small slice owner. I can still fire you. If you're not doing your job, you're bringing us all down. So technically, I could give you a warning, say, Michael, you're not doing your job as you promised. And then I give you another warning, and I can fire you. If you don't want to be fired, then I can resign for good reason, because you're not keeping your end of the bargain up. So the protections are still built in there, even though you're the majority slice holder. So everyone's protected no matter what happens.
We, me and Nick, who just arrived, we are applying to Y Combinator. Cross our fingers. Apparently no one gets in the first try, but we're going to try. I get the sense from stuff we've seen online that they're going to want us to have a really standard entity form. They'll probably help us form a CCorp or something like that, as opposed to an LLC, which I think is what you recommended in the book. I think in principle that the idea is like at the end of YC, you get to present your startup and hopefully you get your Series A pretty soon thereafter. I'm not sure that always happens though. What are some of the pitfalls you see in that situation, and what should we look out for, and how should we get around them?
Y Combinator is going to ask for an equal split for partners. They don't care how you got here.
Oh.
They just, as far as they're concerned, you're starting when you join Y Combinator, and they're going to ask for an equal split, and they're going to make it standard as possible, because all their investors know the terms. If everything's one off, it's a harder deal to make. So think about them as sort of the assembly line for companies. They pick the ingredients, they slap them together, they get the funding. Their job is to get you through as quickly as possible and make a win. They don't necessarily, I don't know them personally, but their job isn't to make you rich or make you fair. So they're going to expect an equal split. Their argument is the work is ahead of you, which is true, but the work to get you there is still your bet. And doesn't mean you're not going to get paid, doesn't mean you're not going to get stock options later on, doesn't mean you're not going to get anything else. It just means that getting to the threshold should be fair. But because, Y Combinator's got their process and their procedures, and you want to follow them as closely as possible to get the most out of that program. Usually the people that they take aren't usually the teams they take are relatively homogeneous teams.
Now, once we get into CCorp, how frozen really is the pie at that point? I mean, I'm sure you could do something to cut up shares and stuff, but
So so slicing pie will take you to break even or Series A.
Mhm.
So in a C Corp, slicing pie is the vesting mechanism. There's no time-based vesting. It's just slicing pie tells you how to vest.
Mhm.
And then beyond, when you raise your Series A, the Series A will impose time-based vesting on your shares. And they'll issue new shares for new participants, and they'll issue for an option pool and things like that. But you should be, after Series A, you should be getting paid a salary. If you're not getting paid a salary, you're still placing bets, and it becomes a struggle because you're not going to work for free forever, are you? Series A should pay you a salary. Otherwise, they're just taking advantage. And a good Series A investor doesn't want you to work for free. So you want to think about this in terms of with Y Combinator, those equal splits, they'll pay your salaries and get you on the road. But if you go through Y Combinator and you don't raise Series A funding and your commitment levels are very different, you can retrofit slicing pie after you leave that experience. The slicing pie always tell you, how badly you're getting burned. One of the nice things about keeping track, one thing people don't like to do is keep track of their expenses and keep track of their salaries. Most companies that are a going concern track their salaries and their payroll and their expenses. There's nothing new here. It's what most companies track anyway. You just, in slicing pie, you're tracking what you don't spend. And because you're tracking that, you have an idea what you would be spending if you were spending. So the cost structures of your business make a lot more sense for you. So you can do that throughout your Y Combinator experience. Keep track of your payroll and keep track of your expenses, and then retrofit later on if you need to adjust the split if it comes too lopsided.
okay, that makes sense. Speaking of tracking stuff, one of the concerns that I had going into this was the tracking hours and stuff. As I've done that in the past, and it's been rough keeping track of stuff on paper. First of all, I have started tracking my time with the technology. I didn't realize how user-friendly it's gotten, so I'm actually enjoying it. But how much pushback do you get from people for something like that? What's the pushback?
You're using my software?
I'm not. I'm using, so for the bigger picture, I got your spreadsheet, and I wanted to talk about that maybe. But do you have something for like hourly?
So people often are concerned about the tracking. I've never had anyone come back and say, the tracking didn't work, so everything fell apart. It's in practice, it's not a hard thing. You can track it as much granularity as you want. If you want to track by hour, you can track by hour. If you want to track by week, you can track by week, by month, whatever it is. So you don't have to track, minute by minute. If you're working part-time, it's useful to have some notes about what's going on. Mm-hmm. So our software, the Slicing Pie software, integrates with Toggle, which is a time tracking software, and Harvest, which I use for my business, invoicing and time tracking. And it integrates with Slack, so you can add a contribution from Slack if you're using Slack. It's not real robust. There is some time tracking features in there. But people push back and say, I don't want to track my time. So you don't have to. Just every week allocate $1,000 for the slices, or if you're worth $120,000 a year, allocate $10,000 in slices every month, and just work full time. So it's whatever granularity you want to track in.
Okay, that's cool. We're actually using Toggle right now. I guess I can look on your website to figure out how that integration works, right?
Yeah, you just import once a week, and it'll just import into the pie. The nice thing about our software is that when you make your contribution, it recalculates in real time, so you can see what your share is. It's kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, that's neat.
It goes boop.
Unless you're the founder, and it's slipping away.
Yeah,
but it's still.
All right. We are getting towards the end. Any wrap-up questions that you guys want to ask of Mike while he's with us?
Mike, I was kind of curious. I saw you've done a book on trade shows, which I've done several times and absolutely hate. I don't know if you have any, but have you had to do a lot of trade shows? Is that what drove you to write the book, or was it kind of like it just like fit nicely in the genre of stuff you?
No, I was in charge of trade shows, and they blew my mind because how bad they sucked just that people, your experience was what other people experienced. And there's such great opportunities that people just blow. And the thing that dawned on me one day is that when you go to a trade show, it's much more important that you know about the attendees than they know about you. It's irrelevant what they know about you. But people spend all their time talking about themselves. So what Trade Show Samurai does, it has a very structured system for for finding leads on the show floor. So there's engagement, an inquiry, interest, disengagement. It's a rapid process, and people that use the book get to 5 to 10 times increase in lead flow from it, and it just blows the doors off things. I love that book. It's one of my best books. No one ever buys it because no one thinks they have a trade show problem. They all think there's experts at it already. So if trade shows ever come back, which they will, pick it up when you go to the next show, and it'll be a big eye opener.
Yeah, and that definitely rings true. The first time we went, we didn't know what we were doing, right? And we weren't even thinking about like ROI. It was just like, we should do a trade show. And we did exactly what you're recommending against, is we sat there the whole time and like people came by the booth and we like gave them the spiel. And then the second time we went, it was like, there's only, it's like, we only need to talk to people who have like $40 million budgets. Like there's really no reason to have a booth, right? I mean, we should have just been walking around hunting people down, but.
I have a company called Mosquito Oasis, and it's a camping company that I started with my 13-year-old son. And he and I went to, when he was actually 12 years old, we went to a trade show in North Carolina. He and I set up a booth. And it just so happened, just serendipitously, that I had another meeting that day, about an hour drive. So I had to meet, so one of the days I had to be gone. So I left my 12-year-old son by himself at the trade show to work the show by himself at the show for 8 hours, which is completely irresponsible of me. But he tripled our sales. We became the highest. Today we're the #1 supplier to Boy Scouts of America, and just because he learned the system.
It's pretty awesome.
That's a lot cooler than a lemonade stand. I'll have to remember that for my kids.
Yeah. But he just worked the booth. He did what I told him to do, and then there's press coverage for him. When the show was over, all the camping gear companies gave him a bunch of free stuff. We had so much stuff we had to leave some in the hotel room. Awesome. But it's literally easy enough that a child can do it.
Love it.
And so I am an irresponsible parent, but making money.
It's too good of a story not to tell, right? You gotta tell it, even if it throws you under the bus a little bit.
Well, thanks a lot for your time, guys. I hope you had any more questions. Please feel free to reach out to me. Slicing Pie always works. For the past 10 years, I've been doing this. The first book came out in 2012. It's been used all over the world. I talk to people all the time. I've never once heard it fail in terms of dividing up equities equal. Fixed splits usually fail. So your next venture, just to have the conversation with your founder, you talk about fair market values, and you will you always have what you deserve.
Excellent. And on that note, I think that's a perfect ending. Thank you very much, Mike, for your time. And I might just reach out to you. So
see you later. Keep in touch, guys.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.